Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to make a card with autumn colors in the Lavinia Stamps products. Hope you enjoy. So I started with my sticker stencil. This one is from pack number 6, and it's the one that's on the far left of the back of the packaging. And I lined it up on my 5x7 inch card base, so it's at the bottom here. And then I started with my darkest distress ink. So this is the lumberjack plaid, and I blended a little bit of this onto the bottom right corner and the top left corner. And I started with heavy pressure, and then I eased off a little bit on the pressure so that the color gradually gets lighter. Next, I added some carved pumpkin distress ink, and I blended this over the same area as the lumberjack plaid. And I started with a lighter pressure here, and then I gradually added more pressure. The next color I added was the squeezed lemonade, and I blended this mostly along the bottom and the top, and I made sure to leave a gap in the middle for my focal point. And then the last color I added was the antique linen, and I put this in the middle area here. And once I was happy with all those colors, I went back again with my darkest color to make sure that these colors would really pop. So I started again with that lumberjack plaid and then worked my way in, just to darken up the colors and blend them properly. And I love this combination of colors, just gorgeous. And I know these colors are very autumnal, but I'm sure you could use these colors year round. They just look so great together. So once I was finished blending the colors over this sticker stencil, I started my stamping. So using the acorn colored ink, I started by stamping some leaves. This is the oak leaf flourish. It actually comes with 2 leaves, and this is the larger of the 2. And I'm just turning the leaf so that it's facing different directions as I'm stamping over the left and the right of the sticker stencil. And I made sure to stamp some of the leaves so they're going off the edges to give a more realistic look. And I also used the smaller leaf in the pack as well. And then once I was finished with the stamping of that oak leaf, I tidied up the stencil around the edges there. And then I used a little ink blending tool and added some of that acorn ink just around the top and the bottom edges, just to further darken that lumberjack plaid. Next, I used the acorn stamp, and I thought it would look nice if I used a 2nd generation stamp. But as you can see there, it's not quite dark enough that it shows up over that inked area. So I ended up just adding some 1st generation stamps of the acorn on top of there. And I also put some 2nd generation ones in the background. And I kept my acorns to the top right of that area, but you could add more if you prefer. And then using Nocturne ink, I stamped the unicorn on the bottom of the card. And this is one of the older Lavinia Stamps animals. It's called Unicorn 2. And although it's an older stamp, I just got it recently, and I really like how it's a silhouette stamp, but you can still tell that it's a unicorn. And then using the acorn ink and one of the masks, I added in some hills at the top of the scene. And when I use the VersaFine Clair ink, I prefer to use the sponges to blend the ink. And this is a great way to keep your tools separate, because I use the domed foam blending tools for my distress inks, and I use the ink sponges for my VersaFine Clair inks. So now you can see I've put the other sticker stencil on top of the area that we've just completed, and now I'm using some Vintage Photo Distress ink. And I started with a smaller brush, but I found that I wasn't putting enough ink down. So I just went back to my domed foam blending tools. And I blended the Distress ink over the entire background. So I used more pressure on the sticker stencil and then pulled the ink out so that it's kind of got a darker, kind of almost like a shadow around the bottle or vase. And then I lightened the pressure further away so the vintage photo gradually gets lighter. And then I just continued blending Vintage Photo over the whole area of this card. And I didn't worry too much about it being a perfect blending job, because I knew that I was going to add some more inking onto the background here. And I love how Lavinia Stamps gives you both the positive and the negative bottle shape in these sticker stencils, so it's really easy to mask off the area that you've just done, and you get a really beautiful scene. Sometimes when I'm using these sticker stencils, I don't manage to line them up perfectly, but it's easy enough to put them on again, and then I can re-ink over any areas that show little bits of white. Or in the past, I've just used a pencil crayon or a marker just to fill in any areas where my stencil wasn't lined up perfectly. So now that I've finished inking, I'm going to use some water and spritz over the background. And that's one of the great things about distress ink, is that it will react to water. And I'm just going to wait a few seconds after spraying, and then I'll use a paper towel and just gently push it in to get rid of any excess ink. Once that's dry with my heat tool, I'm going to use one of the stencils. This one's called Divine, and that same acorn ink, and I'm just going to ink a few areas over the background. And I'm just varying my pressures, so some areas are darker than others. And I'm being sure to leave some areas where there is no stenciling. And I just love the effect on the background. Next, I used one of the cork stamps, and I wanted it to look like the cork was inside the bottle. So what I did is I used a scrap of paper and just stamped off the bottom of the cork, and then did a first generation on the top, as you can see on that scrap of paper. So I'm going to stamp it so that I have a first generation on the top and a second on the bottom. And I'll stamp that over the area on the top of the bottle. So it looks like the cork is darker above the bottle. And then I'm going to stamp my Just For You sentiment from the Heartfelt Verses set and put that on a piece of acorn colored paper. And I'll just put this at the top of the card here. And to finish off this, I used a piece of twine that was in my craft stash and tied it into a bow. And once I was happy with the size of the bow, I just used some PVA or white glue to adhere this on the top of the bottle here. And this is a kind of glue that dries clear, so once it's dry, you won't see it. So I gave that a few minutes to dry, just holding it down until it was in the right place. And then I left this to dry while I worked on the inside of my card blank. So this is my 5x7" card blank, and on the inside here I'm going to use that same Divine Stencil and the same acorn ink. And I'm going to line it up so the stencil is just on the right of the inside of the card. And I'll just add a few bits of acorn ink, just in random areas again. And I'm again varying the pressure, so some areas are lighter and some are darker. And I left the middle area here intentionally white, so I could add another sentiment. And I'm just going to put birthday wishes on the inside here. And then a couple little leaves. And again, this is from the oak leaf flourish set, the larger stamp. And I love how this ties in the oak leaves from the outside of the card as well as that beautiful stencil. And now that the outside of my card is dry, I'm going to adhere it to my card base. And I used a combination of double-sided tape and glue to adhere this. And now you can see the finished card with those autumnal colors. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!